use money that was issued by the Bank of India as well. So until 1970 actually. So this is quite recent. You know, if you went to what is now UAE, you would have had to use Indian money, rupees. You could have used rupees there. It would have been no problem. And then only in 1970 then they began having their dirhams and riyals. So that's also interesting that even in the Gulf, because of the strong connection, trade relations between the Gulf and India, with people migrating for work, which obviously continues today. So that's quite interesting as well.
Yes, that would be interesting. Particularly when all over the world, the currencies were de-linked from the metallic value of the currency. Yeah. Even prior to 1947 or something like the exact date, when all the countries having their currencies, which were defined in terms of gold or silver, they were de-linked from metal. And that was something like this concept of floating value of currency or something like a floating currency, not pegged with any metal. And because of dollar being something like a stable currency, which was earlier currencies were defined, because of it being defined in terms of gold, so it still continues to be something like stable, but it has also something like erosion of the value of dollar. What was the value of dollar? I think I should say in 1920 or in 1945, I should say, because I know this exact figure, exact conversion. In 1945, Bank of USA contributed something like $13 billion to Europe for its reconstruction. Yeah. And they offered that money under Marshall Plan and said that if this money is being taken by any government like Britain or France or Italy, or even they offered it to Russia, the F.S.S, and said that they are really not returning it, then the value of $13 billion of that time was something like $25 or $26 billion. So something like double the value of the money, the depreciation was double, I should say. If the same money depreciated, it since the value of the money. So in that context, how the purchasing power of rupee was there in 1947, and now how its purchasing power, which I will say in a general way, how it was depreciated. And Professor Mishra, our head of department, honorable head of department, has joined. Welcome, Professor Mishra, sir. Can you hear me? आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है प्रोफेसर मिश्रा सर। जी 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 सबों को प्रणाम। गुड आफ्टरनून डॉक्टर अजीम जी and Professor Pandey sir. It is indeed a moment of proud for us that such a enlightening insights is continuously we are getting by Professor Azeem sahab.
Pleasure.
My students, they keep praising on your articulation and the manner in which you answer their queries. So it is this Saturday afternoon, we are indeed very privileged and honored that out of your very hectic schedule, you have taken time to be with us. And the topic, I am so much indebted to Professor Pandey sir, who is renowned historian on contemporary and Indian history and whose wide range of spectrum of interests we are trying to learn from Professor Pandey. I also take this opportunity, Dr. Azeem sahab, that Professor Tabil Kalam was praising you in the last meaningful intervention that you very kindly shared with us, spared with us. I am really thrilled, and we look forward to, in the era of globalization, when the threat from COVID subsides, we will be very warmly welcoming you here in Varanasi. It will be our honor for Faculty of Social Sciences, University in general, and Department of History and Management Studies in particular. So with these kind words, please allow me, I also congratulate Professor Rakesh sir, because I see a very seasoned economist who is going to chair the session, Professor Bhupen Vikram Singh sir. So, back to you, Professor Pandey sir, and you continue to shower blessings on all the students, and whatever little we can do, sir, you are always willing to. Thank you very much for all these encouraging words, and really we are very much enthused and encouraged by your leadership of the Department of History. Today we will also be benefited by the presence of Professor P.V. Singh, Professor Vikram Singh ji, who would be joining. He had communicated that he would be joining because somewhere he is stuck in traffic or somewhere, so he would be joining. So it is very interesting that we would be hearing Azeem Ali Sahab about what is the political economy of independent India, and with the political economy after the end of the British rule, what were the challenges India was facing, and to those challenges, how currency policies, how that emerged. And really it is a very challenging topic to discuss about the political economy of India, particularly from the viewpoint of the currency policy and the currency policy vis-a-vis the other currencies of the world, and how in the very beginning the Indian rupee, how it was acceptable. I was discussing with Dr. Azeem Ali Sahab, how Indian rupee was prevalent in Pakistan for 2-3 years, and then how Pakistan government, when they had their own Bank of Pakistan, then they came up with their own currency. So the things which Dr. Azeem Ali have to say, that I am not going to exhaustively say. I'm just saying, I should say introductory way I am saying, and just I am trying to say that how it is very important to learn about the politics and the economics from the perspective of the currency policy of a government, and how currency policy, like everyone knows, demonetization and a little bit that, and
so, yeah, because I'm going to be covering there was a big issue called the decimalization of currency, and the decimalization in 1957 I'm going to talk about as well, which was a huge.
Yes, of course. So, I could, with the permission of our head of department, Professor Mishra, I would request you to begin your lecture, and Professor P.V. Singh will be joining when he comes, and will be chairing, and then we will be hearing him also his remarks. So now I request the Azeem Ali to kindly start delivering his enlightening lecture on the political economy and currency policy of Indian independence or independent India. Thank you, sir. Professor Ali, you may start.
Okay. Yeah. So today I'm going to talk about the coins of modern India. So just a short recap from my last lecture. Queen Elizabeth I established the English East India Company in 1600, which giving it a monopoly on English trade with India. And trade grew during the 17th century as the English established factories in Gujarat, Tamil Nadu and Bengal. And as the Mughal Empire grew weak after the death of Aurangzeb, Britain assumed a preeminent role as the colonial power in India, and it managed to outmaneuver its colonial rivals, the French, the Dutch, and Portuguese, and establish company rule in India. And company rule was supplanted by direct British rule after the 1857 rebellion, mutiny, and direct British rule will continue for another 90 years until India's independence in 1947. So now I'm going to start looking at slightly just a year before independence, because it kind of gives a context to the political and economic situation in India at the time. So the Constituent Assembly of India was established in 1946, and it consisted of 389 elected members, and its members were drawn from British India and its princely states. And after its first election, Congress won. The Congress Party won 199 out of 210 seats, and the Muslim League won 73 of the 78 Muslim seats, while Congress won 3 of the Sikh seats in Punjab. But the Constituent Assembly wasn't elected on the basis of universal suffrage, and could be argued wasn't actually representative of India. And Congress tried to mitigate this by including representatives from the scheduled caste, the SCs, the Parsis, the Christians, the Anglo-Indians, the Adivasis, and women for the general category. And the Muslim League refused to join the Constituent Assembly's deliberations, despite constant overtures by Jawaharlal Nehru. And despite this setback, the first session of the Constituent Assembly took place on the 9th of December 1946, and Dr. Rajendra Prasad was elected the permanent chairman, and later became the president of the Assembly. And despite Nehru's repeated efforts of making offers to the Muslim League and princely states, both refused to participate in the objective resolution, which was later passed in January 1947. And the Congress Party had a very, very powerful role in the Constituent Assembly. So Sardar Patel worked to bring in princely states into the Constituent Assembly and aimed to eliminate separate electorates, which had been established by Britain, and the reservation of seats for religious minorities. And this was part of a kind of secular approach, which strived for consensus and unity of the country. And Patel aimed to be impartial and dignified when he became president of the Constituent Assembly. And he was supported by Maulana Azad, whose knowledge and scholarship were brought to bear to deal with national issues. And in short, during this time, the Constituent Assembly was dominated by Congress. As a result, India was essentially a one-party country at this stage. But Congress was quite a broad church with views ranging from reactionary to revolutionary. And then, moving a bit forward, on the 15th of August 1947, India became independent, and the Constituent Assembly officially became a sovereign institution in the Dominion of India. And it was now the legislature of India and held authority to draft the Constitution of India and legislate. And thanks to the enormous work undertaken to prepare the Constituent Assembly for this role, it was effective as a constitution-making body. And committees were asked to present reports on issues facing India. And B.N. Rao served as constitutional advisor to help draft India's constitution. And Rao studied the constitution of other countries while preparing his draft. And sadly, Mahatma Gandhi wouldn't live to see the constitution formally enacted later on, in 1950, as he was assassinated on the 13th of January 1948. Despite having played a big role in the independence movement. And the drafting committee of India's constitution was chaired by the noted social reformer, jurist, politician, and economist, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, and he presented a draft of the constitution, which was open for public discussion and comments. He was supported by committee experts who'd been preparing materials and proposals for the constitution since July 1946. And the committee was chaired by Nehru and included Asaf Ali, D.R. Gadgil, and K.M. Munshi. And the fact that the committee was Congress-led left it open to accusations that the proceedings were a formality, as was stated by Shiban Lal Saxena. And Ambedkar actually believed, however, that the Constituent Assembly actually ensured that the Constitution was heavily scrutinized in every detail due to the high level of expertise of its members. And the Constitution of India includes a list of fundamental rights and direct principles, which I'll be referring to later on in this lecture. And it also enshrined India's parliamentary democracy, elected by adult suffrage. And formerly during the British Raj, suffrage was limited to just 15% of the population. And fundamental rights were included to allay fears of alienation by India's religious minorities, which was one excuse that Britain had used for justifying its rule of India. And it also included the rights to equality, freedom of religion, and freedom from exploitation. And the direct principles were also included in the Constitution and are best summarized in Article 38 of the Constitution. The state shall strive to promote the welfare of the people by securing and protecting as effectively as it may the social order in which justice, social, economic, and political shall inform all institutions of public life. And the adoption of a parliamentary system was not without opposition, as Sriman Narayan argued for indirect elections and a decentralized government comprising panchayats in a kind of Gandhian style. But instead, India would adopt a centralized parliamentary constitution. And early on in its existence, the Constituent Assembly had argued for a weak central government, but this change once the partition of India became inevitable. Thus, it was decided that India was to have a federal system with a strong central government. And this was embodied by Dr. Ambedkar's proposal for a union of states rather than a federation of states, his draft of the Constitution. And this was a necessity as India had to deal with communal riots during the bloody partition in 1947, as well as food shortages and the issue of settling refugees from the new country of Pakistan. And also sought to maintain national unity while striving to promote economic and social development, which had been sorely lacking during British rule. And India's federal constitution attempted to minimize instances of conflict between union government and state government. And this was achieved through clear delineations of the legislative powers of the union and state governments. However, laws made by union government will ultimately prevail over state government laws in the event of a conflict. And federalism was also limited by the fact that the union government had overwhelming financial power compared to the state governments. And the political scientist B.H.U. argued that the Indian constitution introduced a system which would normally work as a federal system. But he argued that in practice there are provisions to convert it into a unitary or quasi-federal system under exceptional circumstances. And also, at the state level, you had the governors of India who were appointed as constitutional heads of state governments, mirroring the role of the president in the union government. Well, the president's rule would allow for governors to exercise authority on state governments under Article 356. And when the constitution was drafted, it was expected that governors would be drawn from outside politics. At the local level, state governments were encouraged to support the formation of village panchayats, which could function as units of self-government. And the Indian constitution also provided for the president of India, who invested with the powers of the monarchy of the UK, which compared to India has an uncodified constitution. The president was to serve as the head of state, but not of the executive, and to represent the nation, but not rule it. However, instances of activism by Indian presidents since independence has challenged this notion. And despite this, just as in the British system, the executive is, and still is the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister was the head of Council of Ministers, which was accountable to Parliament. And Nehru called the Council of Ministers the linchpin of government. And interestingly, an American-style presidential government was actually considered, but it was discarded in favour of the British-style, British influence system instead. And from this, the Constitution created a bicameral Parliament consisting of the upper house, the Rajya Sabha, and the lower house, the Lok Sabha. The Rajya Sabha consists of 250 members, of whom 238 are elected by elected members of the Vidhan Sabha via a single transferable vote, a form of proportional representation. The Rajya Sabha is chaired by the Vice President of India, and every 2 years, 1/3 of its members retire. And its aim is to represent different fields, including education and social work. While the Lok Sabha is directly elected every 5 years, but the Constitution provides for emergency situations where its term can be extended. And the judiciary of India had its own powers set out from Articles 124 to 147 and 214 to 237 in the Indian Constitution. And it was to serve as the upholder of the Constitution and was to be independent. And the Constitution specifies the methods of appointment, the years of service, the qualification requirements, the powers of each court, as well as their size and pay. And the judiciary consists of a single hierarchy of courts, with the Supreme Court at the top, headed by a Chief Justice. And the Supreme Court must be paramount in interpreting the Constitution and enforcing the fundamental rights, which is so central to the Constitution of India. And the judiciary in India was served by high courts at the state level, which had powers over all the subordinate courts in their respective jurisdictions. And their powers included issuing writs or orders, and are wider than the Supreme Court as they're not restricted to defending just fundamental rights. And high courts were to be headed by Chief Justices, which mirrored the Supreme Court and the Union government. All judgments on laws by the Supreme Court are binding on all courts across India, while judgments by the high courts are binding on all courts at the state level. And another key institution that was actually, in this case, inherited was the Indian Civil Service, which was inherited when India became independent, and it had helped Britain rule India. It was retained due to the fact that it was one of the few stable institutions that were left in light of the upheavals which accompanied the partition of India. With the population transfers that occurred, the first Indo-Pakistan War that soon followed after independence, and integration of India's princely states made the Indian Civil Service very valuable for its expertise. And most of the British ICS members left after 1947, but a few remained, and these were pro-India. And in time, the ICS was replaced by the Indian Administrative Service under the Constitution. So now we're going to look at the first big challenge that India faced, which was the integration of the princely states, which had formerly controlled much of India. And these princely states had enjoyed a degree of autonomy under British rule, where in return for serving Britain, the princely states would be protected by Britain from the citizens if there were any attempt to overthrow their rule. And India's princely states were given a choice to either accede to India or Pakistan. All but three princely states acceded to India, except Junagadh, Jammu and Kashmir, and Hyderabad. The Nawab of Junagadh decided to accede to Pakistan, but after a popular uprising, he fled there to Pakistan. Shah Nawaz Bhutto, the father of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, later leader of Pakistan, allowed India to intervene in Junagadh. And a plebiscite was held, and the people of Junagadh overwhelmingly supported the accession of Junagadh to India. In Kashmir, Hari Singh didn't initially seek to accede to India or Pakistan, and the National Conference led by Sheikh Abdullah wished for Kashmir to join India. But Pakistan wouldn't accept this and sent Pathan tribesmen led by the Pakistani army officers to invade Kashmir. And this act triggered the first Indo-Pakistan War, as the Pakistani-led Pathan tribesmen were able to defeat Hari Singh's army and advance to Srinagar. Hari Singh appealed to India to intervene. Sheikh Abdullah and Sardar Patel insisted on Kashmir's accession to India as a precondition for intervention. And on the 26th of October 1947, Hari Singh signed the instrument of accession of Kashmir to India. And Indian troops were airlifted to Kashmir, and Pakistani forces were beaten back from the Kashmir Valley. And a ceasefire was agreed between India and Pakistan on the 31st of December 1948, and which became effective the following day on the 1st of January 1949. Now we'll look at the coinage of Kashmir and Hyderabad. So, So you had the silver rupees that were issued in Jammu and Kashmir. And so in 1947, Hari Singh struck coinage in the name of his father, Pratap Singh. And these coins actually have a bit of influence, interestingly, from earlier Sikh rupees, which had been struck in the 19th century with a leaf on the reverse. And one such example of this Kashmiri coin includes the following inscription in Persian, which is basically Pratap Singh, and then V.S., which is Vikram Samvat, and then 1947. And this is the rupee of Hari Singh, struck in 1947 in Srinagar, the capital of Jammu and Kashmir state today. And you can see the leaf here, which shows the influence, actually, interestingly, from the Sikh coinage. So this is a Sikh coin also struck in Srinagar, just over a century before. And you can see here the leaf. So definitely some influence there. This kind of tail end of kind of Mughal influence rupees. And now we're going to look at the accession of Hyderabad to India. So Hyderabad was by far the largest state in India and was surrounded by it. And the Nizam of Hyderabad didn't actually accede to India or Pakistan initially, and instead he focused on increasing his military strength in the event of the Indian invasion. In November 1947, India signed an agreement with Hyderabad whereby representative government would be introduced gradually. And it was hoped that this would make it easier for Hyderabad to be merged with India. But the Nizam of Hyderabad hoped to prolong negotiations in the event that either India would accept Hyderabad's independence or he would accede to Pakistan. Meanwhile, the Hyderabad State Congress launched a satyagraha to pressure the Nizam to democratize Hyderabad and have free elections. And in response, with the Nizam support, the Razakars attacked the protesters. Many of them fled to India. And in Telangana, a communist-led peasant rebellion arose since the kind of second half of 1946 to resist the Razakars. and they attacked local zamindars and redistributed their land among themselves. In June 1948, Sardar Patel urged Nehru to intervene in Hyderabad. And on the 13th of September 1948, the Indian Army finally intervened in Hyderabad, and the Nizam surrendered, and Hyderabad was ceded to India in November 1948. He wasn't punished, and he was actually allowed to keep much of his vast wealth that he accumulated. And I'm going to talk about the coinage. So in 1947, the Nizam of Hyderabad was minting gold ashrafis and nickel annas, and both his gold and nickel coinage have Persian on the obverse and reverse. The obverse depicts the famous Charminar of Hyderabad, which is a symbol of the city today, with an inscription in Persian stating Asaf Jah Bahadur Nizam al-Mulk Osman, and then the Hijri year of 1366 Hijri, which is 1947. And it means Asaf Jah Bahadur, brave ruler of the realm, 1947. The reverse gives a typical value of the coinage, gives the value of the coinage, and gives a following inscription in Persian in typical Mughal style. So this is kind of survival of Mughal style legends going back centuries. And in this case it says 37 Julus Limanat Manus Zab Farkanda Bunyad Hyderabad, which means struck at Farkanda Bunyad Hyderabad in the 37th regnal year of tranquil prosperity, meaning 1927. And here is this nickel 8 anna coin with the Charminar here, the Persian legends. And then here is a gold ashrafi. It's quite a rare coin. Very similar legends, but obviously gold. I'm now going to talk about the coinage of the Dominion of India. So between the 15th of August 1947 and the 26th of January 1950, India was an independent dominion of the British Commonwealth of Nations, and coinage continued to be struck in English to reflect this, including annas, which had been struck during Company Rule and the British Raj. And initially, the Indian rupee was also used in the Dominion of Pakistan as well. And these coins have the Ashokan capital on the obverse with Government of India written in English on the reverse. And the reverse also depicts peacock along with the year 1929 and 2 annas written in Hindi and Urdu. So this is the coin. So you have Hindi and then Urdu here. Some of the earliest coinage of independent India. And then now moving forward in 1950, so 26th of January 1950, which is now Republic Day, the Republic of India was founded with a formal enactment and adoption of the Constitution of India. And this was soon followed with the first general election, which took place from October 1951 to February 1952. And there were 173 million eligible voters. There were over 224,000 polling booths across India, with more than 2.5 million ballot boxes, with almost 620 million ballot papers being printed. A million officials supervised the conduct of the poll. So it's a truly gargantuan task for a new democracy. And candidates were elected on the basis of the plurality of votes, also known as first past the post, which is also used in the UK. More than 14 national parties and 63 regional and local parties contested 489 seats across India for the Lok Sabha. 3,283 seats for the state assemblies were also up for election. 98 Lok Sabha seats and 669 state assembly seats were reserved for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Almost 17,500 candidates stood in the Lok Sabha and state assemblies. Opposition candidates included CPI and Bharatiya Janata Sangh, the latter being a predecessor of the Bharatiya Janata Party, or BJP. However, the political opposition was fragmented, and Congress won 365 seats, almost 75% of seats, with 45% of the vote, along with 2,248 seats, which is about 68.5% seats in the state assemblies. Turnout was about 46.6%, just under half. And the outcome of the first general election, well, it showed that the former rulers of the princely states and zamindars still wielded much influence in some parts of India. And the dominance of Congress held it what had been called a one-party dominant system. But despite this, there was strong opposition which used question hours to make it a high level of debate in the Lok Sabha. But there were serious issues as factionalism began emerging in India, and vote bank parties emerged as a factor, and caste and kinship ties began to play a role in elections. And during this time, so with a democratic mandate, Jawaharlal Nehru proceeded to enact reforms. So in 1952, he founded the first Indian Institute of Technology, which was founded in Kharagpur, which was modeled on MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in USA. And the Hindu Code was also passed, which granted the right to divorce for both men and women. It was granting women the right to inherit family property. There was opposition from religious parties to these reforms, which meant that a uniform civil code for all religions wasn't implemented. But in the same year, community development programs were introduced to improve agricultural methods, communications, and education in rural areas. And in the same year, 1952, Nehru also made overtures to the socialists to promote economic development in India. The latter proposals were later deemed too radical as he wanted to build a consensual form of government as compared to the socialists. In 1953, Nehru extended land reform by abolishing the zamindar system. And 2 years later, he adopted the Abadi Resolution, which sought to establish a socialistic society that emphasized economic modernization and productivity. The same year, the anti-untouchability law was passed as part of Nehru's policy to abolish untouchability. And thus, Congress was firmly kind of center-left on the political spectrum at this time. And later, so you had the 1957 general election, where Congress increased its vote share to 47.78% and won 7 more seats, bringing it to a majority to 371 seats. And the main opposition party, the Socialists, lost 2 seats, so 10.41% of the vote, 90 seats in total. The CPI, the Communists, gained 11 seats and 8.92% of the vote, with 27 seats in total. And the Bharatiya Janata Party gained 1 seat at 5.97% of the vote, with 4 seats in total. And turnout was 35.44%. And with this, again, winning victory, Nehru formed his second government. And in the second government, Nehru introduced the Panchayati Raj program in 1959 to lay the foundation of the welfare state in villages across India. It recognized the shortcomings of the community development program, which includes bureaucracy and lack of popular involvement. Instead, the Panchayati Raj aimed to introduce democratic self-government with the village panchayat at its base. It consisted of a 3-tier directly elected village or gram panchayats. And there were also to be indirectly elected block-level panchayat samitis and direct-level zilla parishads. And also during this time, Nehru was also quite proactive, so not just domestically in reforming the country, but also internationally. So Nehru actually believed, he was quite radical for the time, that India should be non-aligned during the Cold War, when the world was being divided into 2 blocks, the Soviets and the Americans. And this meant the policy of neutrality. That was first apparent when he tried to call for ceasefire during the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. And this neutrality was appreciated by the Soviet Union, which supported India's position of Jammu and Kashmir in the UN from 1955 against Pakistan, which was becoming closely aligned with the USA. It can be argued that this heralded the beginning of Indo-Soviet friendship, which would play a bigger role later on in India's history. In 1954, India recognized China's annexation of Tibet in 1950, and relations would be governed by the Panchayat principles. In the same year, India worked with China in Southeast Asia, where French colonies were fighting for their independence. Nehru again proposed peaceful resolutions to these emerging conflicts in the region. In 1959, there was a major crisis for India when the Tibet rebellion was crushed by China, sending the Dalai Lama and Tibetan refugees into India. This led to the first border clash between India and China at the Konka Pass in Ladakh in October 1959. And now we can look at the coinage. So there was a big change in Nehru's second term. So India shifted to the decimal coinage system, and these new coins have the legend Naya Paisa or New Paisa on them, and the denominations range from 1 to 50 pesos, and included 1 rupee. And this created a severe economic disruption across India, because initially both decimal and non-decimal coins were in circulation, and converting the values of the old Anna coins to new paisa proved to be a hassle. For example, one rupee was now 100 Naya paisa, while 1 quarter Anna became 3 paisa. So it was quite confusing for a lot of people across the country, both in urban and rural India. This created a lot of disruptions in the country. This is one of the coins that was issued just before the decimalization. So just after India became a republic. So this is 1 paisa, minted in bronze, and this time with purely Indian inscriptions and English. And this is a copper nickel 1 anna, minted in 1954. So before decimalization took place. And then this is, again, a repeat point also struck for decimalization, all minted in Mumbai. And then this is a Naya Paisa struck in 1957. And this is the coin that caused a lot of chaos when it was introduced, as people were trying to convert the old values into the new values. And now they look slightly later into Nehru's second term as his defense policy, was obviously funded by this new currency. So Krishna Menon, the defense minister, took steps to initiate defense research and development, and these steps were intended to increase India's ability to develop its own defense equipment to meet its military needs. In 1960, India received military aid from the Soviet Union in the form of supply-dropping aircraft, helicopters, and engineering equipment, and this was intended to help the roads in the Indian border with China. In 1962, the Indian National Committee for Space Research was established along with the rocket launching facility in Kumba. In mid-1962, India was given a license by the Soviet Union to build MiG fighter jets. And it was in that year that disaster would strike India in October of 1962, which would overshadow Nehru's government. During the Cuban Missile Crisis of the USA and Soviet Union, China attacked India in what is now known as the Sino-Indian War. India had been woefully unprepared and was defeated by the Chinese Red Army, who then withdrew to the line of actual control. In 1963, India signed more agreements with India. The Soviet Union signed more agreements with India to sell arms and military hardware, including tanks and helicopters. A naval dockyard was also built. The Soviet Union gained India as an ally to counterbalance China after the Sino-Soviet split in the 1960s. And Nehru never fully recovered from the shock of the Sino-Indian War. He faced political opposition to his handling of the conflict. He was forced to sack Krishna Menon as defense minister, which was a big blow to his government. And his third economic plan was affected by the conflict, as resources were diverted to defense expenditure. Worse still, Congress lost several parliamentary by-elections in a row. In August 1963, Nehru faced a no-confidence motion from former Congress Party member and Praja Socialist Party leader Acharya J.P. Gopalani, and the vote was won by Nehru with 285 votes. In the following month, he attempted to defend his conduct of the Sino-Indian War by stating that he didn't want to spend too much on the military. Instead, he argued that if India industrialized, then it would be military strong as a result. And India already faced Pakistan as an enemy, and Nehru argued that he didn't want another enemy, China, to contend with. But nevertheless, the Sino-Indian War and its aftermath would take a strong toll on Nehru's death, and he died in May 1964. And Nehru's death led to a leadership contest in Congress, with the syndicate led by K. Kamaraj, who led the Congress Party during this interim period. The two main contenders were Morarji Desai and Lal Bahadur Shastri. Desai was considered to be more experienced, well-good administrator, but some found him quite rigid and inflexible, which made him unpopular with many of the Congress Party members. In the end, Shastri won the political contest, and as he was considered mild, tactful, and malleable, and he was also highly respected by the Congress Party. And he was elected unopposed and was sworn in as leader on the 2nd of June 1964. Shastri didn't make any major changes to his cabinet initially. One exception was that he invited Nehru's daughter, Indira Gandhi, to be Minister of Information and Broadcasting. Cabinet ministers operated with greater autonomy under Shastri's leadership, and he kept a low profile. And a major diplomatic challenge in this era was the status of Hindi and English as official language of India. The problem wasn't really solved until 1966. And the Indian economy at this time had also been stagnating due to slow industrial growth and the balance of payments profit, which was a growing issue for the government. And Shastri was criticized for being indecisive, but over time he began to assert himself. He strongly denounced American bombing of North Vietnam, for example, and also set up his own secretariat headed by L.K. Jha to advise and provide information to him. And during this time, we also see the origin of the Green Revolution. In 1965, agricultural production had slowed, and there was severe drought in several states. This led to the depletion of reserve food stocks. And in response, the State Food Trading Corporation was established in January 1965. While it didn't procure enough food grain, it did initiate the Green Revolution strategy. And this strategy aimed to increase agricultural output to make India self-sufficient in food production. And after this, so 1965, in the same year, we have one of the probably the biggest event that overshadowed Shastri's government, the 1965 Indo-Pakistan War. So relations between Pakistan and India had been severely deteriorating as the latter disputed India's control of Jammu and Kashmir. Sheikh Abdullah's followers and other dissident leaders began creating much unrest in the Kashmir Valley. The Pakistani leadership thought the time was right to intervene thanks to military support from the USA. And India's defeat at the hands of China in 1962 was fresh in the mind of many in the Pakistani army. And in April 1965, a part of the Quran of Quds was occupied by Pakistan. And Pakistan wrongly concluded that India wasn't ready for war. Pakistan sent infiltrators to foment unrest in the Kashmir Valley and thus invited military intervention by Pakistan. But this strategy failed and the Kashmiri people didn't support the infiltrators. Shastri ordered the Indian army to cross the 1948 ceasefire line and seal the passes at Kalgam, Puri and Hajipir to deny the infiltrators. On 1st September, Pakistan launched a massive offensive at Sham in Jammu and Kashmir in an attempt to sever road links in the region. The Indian army was ordered by Shastri to not only defend Kashmir, but to cross the Pakistani Punjab. Sikhs, Hindus, Christians, Muslims and parties all fought together to defend India. And the war went well in India's favour before international pressure led to a ceasefire being agreed at the UN Security Council. This culminated in the Tashkent Declaration, which was signed on the 4th of August 1966 in the Soviet Union. Both sides were to withdraw and return to their pre-war August positions. Sadly, though, 6 days later, after the signing of the declaration, Shastri died of a heart attack in Tashkent. And this, what followed was the second leadership contest. So again, Raja Desai contested the leadership after Shastri's death, but the syndicate were opposed to him. Instead, they chose Nehru's daughter, Indira Gandhi, who at the time was considered to be young, inexperienced, and lacking roots in the Congress party. It was also thought that she would be easy to manipulate as well. And she had the backing of 12 out of 14 chief ministers, and she used Nehru's name, her father's name, to attract voters. On the 19th of January 1966, Indira Gandhi won the leadership contest. She won by 355 votes against Desai, who had 169 votes. And it can be argued this is the beginning of dynastism in the Congress party, which has been an issue that's taken ever since. And when she came to power, there were severe crises in India. So there were crises in Punjab, Nagaland, Mizoram. The Punjab crisis was solved through the formation of Punjab state and the Union Territory of Chandigarh and Haryana. Indira Gandhi pursued negotiations with the Naga rebels for autonomy. But however, at this time, India's economy was in recession with decline in industrial exports. Rains also failed in 1965, 1966, which led to drought, inflation, and food shortages. And famine relief was pursued in a war footing, and food procurement and distribution were prioritized. In order to deal with declining exports, the rupee was devalued by 35.5% to encourage the inflow of foreign capital. It also ensured continued economic aid from the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. However, relations with the US cooled as the pressure for India to change its position in the Vietnam War in exchange for economic aid. And in the 1960s, then, was another general election where turnout was much higher this time. It was 61.1%. But Congress began losing support due to de factoism at both the state and the central level. This was reflected in the reduction of Congress's majority in Lok Sabha from 224 seats to 48 seats. It lost its majority in states such as Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and West Bengal. The opposition parties began working together at the state level to defeat Congress, and this led to coalition governments at the state level. And in 1969, factionism emerged within the Congress party. It had been growing for a time, and this contributed to its poor performance in the midterm elections in 5 states. The economy continued to decline, with corruption and unrest growing in rural and urban India. And this, the split in Congress party was triggered by the death of President Zakir Hussain in May 1969. Indira Gandhi put her own candidate for president, V.B. Giri. The syndicate was determined to place Sanjeeva Reddy as president, and they ultimately planned to out Indira Gandhi. She retaliated by forcing Morarji Desai to resign as finance minister, and she took the role herself. And she nationalized 14 major banks through presidential ordinance. And initially, nationalization was welcomed by many of the public in India, and Indira Gandhi's popularity increased. And the clash between the syndicates and Indira Gandhi's choices for president ultimately went in her favor. And Giri was elected by a narrow majority in 20th of August 1969. And this led to Congress's first split, with the forming of the Congress R, or Requisitionist Party, led by Indira Gandhi, and the syndicate forming their own Congress O Party, or organization. And now we're going to look at the coinage from the 1960s. So 1964, Naya was dropped from the Paisa, and a new denomination was introduced, the hexagonal 3 Paisa, was introduced and minted in aluminium. And in 1968, the 20 Paisa was introduced and minted in aluminium bronze. These small denominations have been introduced to deal with rising commodity prices in the 1960s. And but neither coin actually became popular. This is the aluminium peso. It's quite a worn example. This is just an example from 1964. And this is a aluminium bronze 20 peso from 1968. These were continually circulated into the 1970s. And in the 1970s, we had another general election. So Indira Gandhi's attempts to abolish the privileges of the princes, Privy Purse and National Bank was actually frustrated by the Supreme Court. And she was in a weak position, and she already had a minority government. So on 21st of February 1971, elections were held. Her Congress party won 52 Lok Sabha seats, and this gave them a two-third majority. And her position was secure for the time being. And that would be very necessary because in March 1971, at that time, a crisis had been fomenting in neighboring East Pakistan. A civil dispute movement had formed to oppose Pakistan's leader General Yahya Khan's refusal to allow the Awami Party to form a government in Pakistan after the elections. The Pakistani army launched a military crackdown on the movement, and many Bengalis fled the violent reprisals to India. In April 1971, the Indian army began preparing for swift military action against Pakistan to resolve the crisis. The Mukti Bahini were trained and armed by India. On 9th of August 1971, India signed a friendship treaty with the Soviet Union to avert any response from the USA and China. By November 1971, there were 10 million Bengali refugees in India, including the government in exile. On 3rd of December of that year, Pakistan launched a surprise attack on 8th Military Air Force in India, hoping to damage the Air Force. Indian Air Force. This was unsuccessful. The Indian Air Force had prepared for such an event by withdrawing beforehand to interior airfields. And India immediately recognized Bangladesh and launched a short, swift and decisive offensive against Pakistan. Within 11 days, the Indian army had reached Dhaka, despite American efforts to halt them. By 16th of December, the Pakistani army had surrendered to India. And the following day, there was a unilateral ceasefire announced by India. And the ceasefire was accepted by Pakistan. And Mujibur Rahman came to power in Bangladesh. And now Indira Gandhi stood at the height of her popularity. And she used her popularity in 1972 to nationalize general insurance in the coal industry. Limits were also put in urban land ownership. However, in 1973, Indira Gandhi's popularity began to wane as poverty and inequality remained as key issues. And there was also a recession with unemployment, inflation, and a budgetary deficit. And this wasn't helped by the 1973 oil shock, which increased oil prices. And this led to strikes across India as the Indian economy was in turmoil. 1974, the rise in price of grains, cooking oil, and other commodities led to unrest across Gujarat. There were strikes, looting, and rioting, and the police had intervened to control the violence. And the state government was suspended and president's rule was enacted. And fresh elections were promised for June 1975, which initially helped to alleviate the crisis. In March 1974, students began protesting in Bihar, and they soon had support from opposition parties. And now what emerged was what became known as the Bihar movement, which was led by Jayaprakash Nayan, or JP for short, and he called for total revolution and an end to corruption. He called for the dissolution of the State Assembly and Congress, and for the Congress government to resign. And Indira Gandhi refused to concede, however. This led to JP to turn the Bihar movement into a national one, and he began touring India. He drew support from students, middle classes, traders, and hoped to become a credible alternative to Congress. But without organization structures, the movement began to decline by the end of 1974. But following year, the opposition movement would experience a revival when, in June 1975, Justice Sinha of the Allahabad High Court convicted Indira Gandhi of corrupt campaign practices and declared her election invalid. This forbade her from seeking election for parliament and holding office for 6 years as Prime Minister. In addition to this, the Gujarat Assembly elections went badly for Congress, and the Janata Party won 87 out of 182 seats. The Janata Party formed a government in alliance with Chimanbhai Patel. This led to the re-emergence as well of the JP movement, and demands for Indira Gandhi's resignation grew, and her days seemed numbered. And now, looking at one of the most infamous periods of Indira Gandhi's government, the emergency. So she claimed that opposition to rule was a threat to Indian democracy. And rather than follow democratic procedures, where she could dissolve the Lok Sabha and call for fresh elections, she proclaimed a state of internal emergency on 26th of June 1975. No political processes were halted, fundamental rights and civil liberties were suspended, and there was also censorship along with the rest of the opposition, including Jayaprakash Nayan, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and Morarji Desai. And academics, trade unionists, and student leaders were also arrested. And J.P. Vajpayee and Charan Singh were all released by 1976. And Parliament's power was curtailed, and state governments were strictly controlled by the Congress party itself. And Indira Gandhi had concentrated state and party power in her hands. She tried to appease the public with a 20-point program on the 1st of July that year. It included offers of debt relief for labourers and farmers, checks on hoarding, smuggling and tax evasion, and the promises of more housing. In addition to this, the price of food and other essential goods fell and their availability improved. But the 20-point program was a failure due to large landowners and peasants and the bureaucrats who all opposed it. And thus, popular discontent grew against the emergency as agricultural output declined and prices rose again by the end of 1976. Corruption remained endemic, and slow progress on welfare reform affected the poor. Workers faced limits on wages, bonuses, and right to strike. The police and bureaucracy had got increased powers with little accountability. The opposition now grew among teachers, journalists, and lawyers, as the emergency was reached in an effort to subvert democracy in India. And meanwhile, Sanjay Gandhi had also emerged with parallel authority to his mother, Indira Gandhi, and he oversaw controversial family planning policies that led to compulsory sterilizations. And there was violent resistance to this policy in Delhi and other cities which were affected. And on January 1977, Indira Gandhi announced that elections would be held for Lok Sabha in March the same year. Political prisoners were released and censorship ended. Free elections resumed on the 16th of March and saw Congress being thoroughly defeated. The Janata Party formed the next government under Marathi Desai. It demonstrated how Indian public, both urban middle classes and poor, were all united in their concern for basic civil rights. And Marathi Desai became Prime Minister on the 24th of March 1977. Unfortunately, though, for the Janata government, they found themselves in crisis at the very beginning because of the lack of confidence in its ability to govern. It was unable to deal with rising social tension in rural areas, and caste tensions grew, and there was violence against the scheduled castes who wished to retain the rights granted to them under the 21-point program. The Janata Party drew support from rich and middle peasants on the other hand, and large landowners, shopkeepers, and businessmen. And thus there was a greater emphasis on rural development compared to the industry-oriented growth of the Indian economy, as had been the case in dairy. And land reform and higher wages were not delivered. But the Food for Work program did improve rural infrastructure. And by this stage, Indira Gandhi appeared to be spent-forced, and the Congress party split in January 1978 with Congress I for Indira and Congress U for Devraj Ose. In February 1978, Indira Gandhi's fortune revived as Congress I won elections to state assemblies in Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. She won Chikmagalur constituency in Karnataka in November 1978, but was expelled and imprisoned by the Janata Dal government for a week. In 1979, there were efforts to convict her for alleged criminal acts during the emergency. This was viewed as a distraction from the Janata government's poor performance as factors that began to undermine the Janata party. And Desai's government resigned on 15th of July 1979, and Charan Singh formed a new government a week later. Eventually, Charan Singh advised the President of India, Neelam Sanjeeva Reddy, to dissolve the Lok Sabha, and elections were held in January 1980. The Janata Dal warned about Indira Gandhi opposing democracy again, and civil liberties, or promoting a form of peasant Raj. But the Congress I set the power to hold 303 out of 529 seats, which gave them a two-thirds majority. Consequently, the Janata Party split, with the old Jana Sangh leaders leading from the Bharatiya Janata Party, or B.H.U. And now Indira Gandhi was back in power. And in the same year, assembly elections were held, and this also went well for Congress. They won 1522 states. But however, Indira Gandhi at this time no longer had quite the grasp of an administration that she had had before, and she didn't really undertake any significant new initiatives. She was very cautious and hesitant, which led to a lot of dithering a lot of the time when dealing with problems that she faced. And in the same year, she had a kind of personal tragedy for her when Sanjay Gandhi was killed in an air accident at Safdarjung Airport. And there continued to be factionism and infighting within her own party at this time, didn't help things. And then there was a big crisis following year, the Akali Dal, that began seeing agitation in Punjab. And son Jainal Singh Bhinrali began initiating campaign of violence. It was initially given tacit support by Gyani Singh of Punjab Congress to combat the Akali Dal. But this would later come to hold both the Punjab Congress and Congress Party. And violence began with the assassination of the head of the Nirankari sect and a journalist and critic, Lala Jagat Narayan, in order to escape retribution. Bhindrawali hid in the Golden Temple where he could direct the terrorist campaign in Punjab. In 1983, he began targeting reformer Sikhs and Hindus, which incited communalism in India, in Punjab, I should say. And in the same year, end of the year, he moved into Akal Park which is the holiest part of the Golden Temple complex, to evade capture and stockpile weapons there for the armed force. And violence continued, and soon Akali Dal moved from being initially ambivalent to Binawali to kind of supporting him. This is partly due to their common aim to separate Sikh state, although they differed on methods. And Indira Gandhi's hesitancy and indecisiveness didn't help this issue. And the issue began to go on, really go out and put out of control. And by June 1984, Pakistan's supporters of Binawali had emboldened the separatists and communal violence. This alarmed India, the Indian government. And in the same month, Indian Army intervened in Amritsar to end the threat of Binawali. And this was also ranking with the emergency. This is another very controversial episode in Indira Gandhi's rule. So she stormed the Golden Temple complex, and it turned to a full-scale battle as Binawali's armies were well equipped. And Binawali and his followers were killed during the offensive, but sadly, a lot of Sikh worshippers and staff were caught in the violence, more than 1,000, and the Harmandir Sahib was also damaged in the fighting, and this caused considerable outrage to Sikhs across India. And on 31st of October 1984, Indira Gandhi was assassinated by Sikh bodyguards, which sparked communal violence in Delhi. And in that month, Indira Gandhi's son Rajiv Gandhi took office as Prime Minister, and 2 weeks later, in that same month, the Bhopal gas tragedy killing 2,000 people and hospitalizing thousands more. And then the general election was held from 24th to 27th of December of that year. And Congress won 415 out of 543 seats of the Lok Sabha, including in Amethi, where Rajiv won the seat there. And Rajiv Gandhi's government saw efforts to set up 6 technology missions to solve problems in areas of underdevelopment. These included efforts to provide clean drinking water, literacy, immunization, milk production, oil production, and telephones in every village in India. Computerization was promoted, which later resulted in India becoming a center of software production, and also efforts at liberalizing the economy through the relaxation of controls, increase of exports, and the reduction of import duties. And Rajiv Gandhi also tried to deepen and strengthen panchayati institutions, but this was defeated by the opposition in the Lok Sabha. And the employment plan was implemented to try and provide more employment for rural poor families, wherever the Navodaya Vidyalaya was considered more elitist, although aimed to provide more quality education for children in rural families. The National Perspective Plan for Women was drafted in 1988 with reservations for women in panchayat institutions. Also efforts to promote Indian culture abroad, protect the environment, and also efforts to have greater openness and accountability in politics, while it made it more difficult for political parties to split, which had been a big issue for Congress for the past few decades. But however, all these efforts were slightly curtailed by Rajiv Gandhi's December 1985 speech, which was universally considered to be quite disrespectful and kind of damaged his image domestically. And looking at his foreign policies, soon after he came to power in 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev became leader of the Soviet Union. And Rajiv Gandhi supported Gorbachev's efforts to reduce nuclear arms stockpile. In 1985, he also visited the USA and apparently got along well with Ronald Reagan. And he managed to obtain a supercomputer for processing weather data. But the USA's support for Pakistan and the Soviet-Afghan war hindered relations between USA and India. And the following year, there had been a decline in Sino-Indian relations at the border crisis, but this improved with Rajiv's visit to China in 1988. And in 1987, however, Tamil war Sri Lanka was becoming too difficult to ignore for India. This led to India launching a failed intervention in Sri Lanka lasting until 1989. And during this period, Rajiv Gandhi also did much work to draw global attention to apartheid in South Africa and efforts to end it. And linked to foreign policy was defense procurement. So India leased a nuclear submarine from the Soviet Union and procured its second aircraft carrier from the UK, the INS Virat. But it was a procurement of the Bofors Haufer guns from Sweden, which would overshadow Rajiv Gandhi's government. We still remember that today. The Bofors scandal broke in 1987, when there were allegations on Swedish radio that 64 rupees were paid to Indian officials and Congress party members, and this was for a contract for 410 howitzer guns from Bofors. The opposition accused Rajiv Gandhi and his family of pocketing the bribes. Gyani Zail Singh used the scandal to try and oust Rajiv Gandhi in mid-1987 on charges of corruption. V.P. Singh didn't get involved, and this fell through. The scandal wouldn't go away and featured heavily in 1989, and the opposition resigned en masse, and an election would soon follow. On the 22nd and 26th of November 1989, there was a general election, and it went badly for Congress, as despite winning 197 seats and 39.5% of the vote, Congress wasn't interested in forming a government. Thus, the National Front, led by Janata Dal, the Janata Dal Party, with support from the BJP, would take power, and VP Singh took office as Prime Minister on the 2nd of December 1989. VP Singh's government was unstable from the start as Chandrasekhar opposed VP Singh becoming Prime Minister. This led to growing infighting within the government, including between Devilal and Ajit Singh. Devilal launched a protest movement against VP Singh on the 9th of August. And this was soon followed by a major body disaster with the implementation of the findings of the Mandal Commission, appointed by the Janata government in 1977 to 1979. It recommended reservations for backward castes for 27% of jobs at public undertakings. This brought reservations to 49.5% in total. There was widespread opposition due to its arbitrary and sudden manner without consultations. This because student protests was opposition from parties such as CPM. Was also accused of pitting caste groups against each other. And the BJP would later break with the Janata Dal after the Babri Masjid dispute in Ayodhya, which would later lead to its demolition in 1992. The campaign actually started in late 1984. And ultimately, on the 5th of November 1990, the Janata Party split, and 50 legislators elected Chandrasekhar their leader. 5 days later, Chandrasekhar took office as Prime Minister. He was essentially an interim government as elections were expected the following year. On the 5th of March 1991, Congress withdrew support from Chandrasekhar and elections were announced on 9th of May. But unfortunately, in that year, Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated in May 1991 by the LTTE in Tamil Nadu during the campaign rally. And after this election, there was sympathy wave, and Congress won 232 seats, which made them the largest party. Narasimha Rao formed a minority Congress government on 21st of June, and he's best remembered for overseeing economic reforms which liberalized India's economy. And Rao's government would be in power until the 1996 general election. And now looking at coinage from that period, so looking slightly back, so in 1970 the Bretton Woods system had ended and global currencies were no longer pegged to the gold bullion value in the world markets. And in the 1980s, particularly in 1988, the 10, 25 and 50 pesos were introduced in stainless steel. In 1991, there was a currency devaluation crisis and attempts to stimulate foreign investment under Rao's government, which kind of precluded the liberalization reforms that he would enact. In 1992, a new 1 rupee coin was introduced, and this was also stainless steel. And the same year saw commemorative 1 rupee coins with copper nickel, which were also introduced into circulation. So this is a stainless steel 25 paisa, struck in 1988. And this is a copper nickel 1 rupee, minted in 1992. This is a commemorative issue, I believe, for World Food Day. So the kind of last point I'm looking at. And thank you. And on that note, I finish my presentation. So thank you.
It was a very exhaustive presentation. We covered the whole, I should say, the series of events, political events, and also we touched upon the economic events, major economic events, and side by side the points and the related things. It was very interesting lecture, and really, I should say it is immensely summarized lecture, immensely summarized in the sense that such an exhaustive topic we have or you have chosen to speak on the currency and the political economy. So actually it will require more and more lecturing on this topic to understand the political economy of independent India along with the currency policy. So even then I should say that it was very enlightening, very exhaustive, and we are blessed or we are benefited by the presence of our colleague, friend, brother, economist, great economist, Professor B.H.U. Singh ji, and he is there. And I hope he would have heard you from the beginning. And I would request him to kindly come up with his remarks as the chairperson, chairman of the whole Thank you, Rajesh. And thank you also for giving me this opportunity to listen to Ali. It was really, as you commented upon, it was really very exhaustive and it covered so many issues. And also, in between, we also had glimpses of the points and currencies. But as a student of economics, I think the narration and the issues that was mentioned, it was of some relevance to me. So I was educated on it, and not purely economics somehow it entered. And some of the queries and is, on that I may ask, and that will enlighten me. Right from 1948 slowly, there was just a flash of the idea that came to my mind. There was a changing political and economic scenario, and also to bringing out certain common currencies. And it started right from 1950, and when we had Anna Pai and Rupee. In 64 is the 16 was the denominator, and then we moved on to the decimal system and currencies of different denominations were issued. So, and the type of currency and the construct of currency that also kept changing. So, as a expert of mathematics, can we think of that the political economy or the economy on the whole also had some impact on the critics of the bringing out the point, the shape, the denomination?
Yeah, I think also, I think it was an attempt, there definitely was a critical aspect, but also there was a move away from, because, India had retained the old colonial denominations, like the annas. So it's actually, I think it was a critical move as well, because they wanted to put the kind of...
Anna was not colonial. I think it is pre-colonial.
It was pre-colonial, but it was kind of the denomination.
The British rule that kept going with this Anna and then after 1950, only for, I think it was back to 66. And after 66, we changed to the decimal system. And changing decimal system and Anapai from Anapai, that is one issue. That is not important because you have to cope with the changing international economic scenario. That is one important aspect. But as the historian, how you look at that the type of currency and the form of currency and the cryptics, how you make, initially there was some sort of encryption on the coins and what they call guineas. There were certain encryption, and then it changed to Indian. That was the political domination represented by that. But given that, whether some more cryptics were added to reflect the philosophical idea of political and economic government of those times.
I think also, Nehru is, a lot of some political science consider Nehru to be kind of a great modernizer, so it might have been F.S. also kind of, my interpretation might be that it kind of part of his policy of kind of modernizing India at this time, because, obviously India had been through a lot of, it's been very rough period in the period to be quickly, backwards. So Nehru wanted to kind of modernize the country. So obviously, because in this country, decimalization was introduced in the actually after India, we had decimalization in this country. So it was kind of it was a broader. Actually, India was actually ahead of the UK in this regard in decimalizing the currency. So it was actually quite a forward-headed, progressive move by the government actually. Even though it did cause a lot of disruptions, as people didn't really understand how to convert them from the old value to new value. There was a lot of issues actually. That's what I found in my research from the finance ministry, the Ministry of Finance in India, that there were a lot of issues because people didn't know like what the values were. But in the long run, I think it was a very good move, and I think it was kind of, again, when you read it in the kind of context of what Nehru was doing, setting out all these programs, institutions in India, I kind of think you can put it in that context, especially in his first and second terms. That's how I would view it.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, it was really a very good intervention and observation by Professor B.H.U, who has been, who is an expert to speak on these things. As a student of history, I have a query, or rather, I have a curiosity that how you rate the speed of depreciation the Indian rupee was experiencing in comparison with other currencies of the world. If you have given your mind to this very phenomenon, that how different currencies, with the passage of time, they got depreciated in comparison with their own initial value. What was the value of rupee in 1950 and what is the value of rupee in the end of the 20th century? And in that context, if you compare the different currencies of the world, like dollar or like pound sterling or franc or other currencies like ruble or that in Japan, so how you interact to this very reality that currencies were regularly getting depreciated from the point of time when they were delinked from their metallic value. Earlier, the currencies were defined in terms of metals, like gold, they were defined. When the definition of the currency delinked from the metal, different depreciations took place. But in certain countries, in certain currencies, the depreciation was very fast. And that was something like reflection of the political situation of the country, like when we come to 1991, when we find when we see the Soviet Union economy, then how ruble got something like immense depreciation, the Soviet economy. But just I'm asking you in a very innocent manner that how you see the rate of the depreciation of currencies in different countries and how you see the stability of the currency continuing throughout the period. Yes, if you could answer this.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you. I think you're also hinting also the Bretton Woods system, which I think really must be mentioned in the context of this, because that was the main system to govern all the world of currencies at that time, especially from 1945 to the 70s when President Richard Nixon ended it, where all the currencies in the world were pegged into the dollar rather than gold, which is exactly what you were hinting at, and obviously that gave the dollar kind of supreme power in the world, but also like the idea of devaluing the currency was not a new what wasn't particular to just India. Like in the UK, UK also undertook a devaluation to stimulate the economy. But again, I think obviously comparing the value of rupee, say in 1947 to the dollar to now is difficult because obviously you have the decimization, so one has to create kind of estimates of what that value would have been. But obviously in the world, I mean, at the time, obviously between kind of the first few decades of independence, obviously the dollar was kind of supreme. I mean, everything was. All currencies were linked to the dollar, and I think even today, I mean, the dollar still has that weight even today. And but obviously, like, if you compare, like, I haven't checked the exchange rate now. I mean, I should probably know. I'm actually visiting Delhi actually in December. Just Delhi in December, so I should really know the value of the rupee against the pound. But I know that, but I'm not particularly knowledgeable about what it was before. I mean, I don't know what the value was at independence. I'm afraid I didn't see what the exchange rate would have been. I don't know if the professor who spoke to you, if he would know the kind of value of the rupee at independence, because obviously I know how it's fluctuated in the last few decades, because when I go and visit, but actually, if you could enlighten me on that, actually, that would be very helpful.
Yes, I can understand that would require something like a separate lecture on that very topic. How different currencies of the world they depreciated and how the rate differed. Some currencies they were faster in depreciation, some were lesser speed. So we have Dr. Sutapa Das, our colleague, who is there from the very beginning. Dr. Sutapa, can you hear me, please? Dr. Sutapa, are you there? Okay. I think now I should just express my thanks for such a wonderful lecture which you gave, and also I thank my head of department, Dr. Keshav Mishra ji, Professor Keshav Mishra ji, who was from the very beginning. Yes, yes. Dr. Sutapa is there. So, taking advantage from the presence of Dr. Sutapa, I just asked Dr. Sutapa, or request rather, to come up with some questions or queries which we have regarding the lecture of Dr. Ali, because you have been there from the very beginning. I saw you. So just if you have some queries, or if you don't have, then even I will just request you to promote something like a vote of thanks for the honorable Azeem को Professor B.H.U सिंह को फाउंडेशन के बीच में हमने दे सकते
things that how to see all those materials and understand history through that. And Azeem ji and all the delegates who have come and presented their lecture and giving the valuable inputs. I think that has enriched our knowledge, and that will be enriching because Azeem ji was especially a series of lecture I have heard, and he always comes up with points and show it and show the जो visually हम लोग चीज को देखते हैं तो बहुत और भी ज्यादा उसमें इंटरेस्ट आ जाता है और रोचक होता है चीजों को समझना. So that हिस्ट्री जो है हम लोग के आज की जो सेशन है उससे ये समझ आता है कि हिस्ट्री जो है वो सिर्फ ब्रिटिश नॉलेज जो है उसमें सीमित नहीं है. We should also see history and then we can integrate with history. So all the dignitaries who have come and presented their view. My heartfelt head of the economics department. I am very new to this B.H.U, so please pardon me if I am not knowing the department clearly, but I am really listening to you and honored that my knowledge has also grown by participating in this kind of lecture. So my heartfelt thanks to dignitaries who have presented their views to their research. We could also gain knowledge, and through such kind of knowledge sharing, I think we will enrich ourselves and will get more integrated to history through this visual attachment. Thank you so much. And it is my honor and privilege to be associated with this kind of lecture. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Sutapa. And may I request our head of department to, in a general manner, express on behalf of the department and university. Thank you, Professor Pandey sir, for giving me this opportunity. Dr. Azeem ji, I don't have words. I am at the loss of words and expression. The sheer breadth of the lecture is mind-boggling, I must admit. And the sort of rigor which has gone into the making of each slide, it's really, I just don't have words, it was each and every lines are so meaningful, full of insights for our students. And at this point of time when department is going to select PhD scholars, it will be an inspiration for them. The sort of rigorous research that you have undertaken and that you have put before all our students, Department of History in general and Heritage Management in particular, we are really indebted to you, Dr. Azeem sir. I also take this opportunity to thank Professor B.H.U sir, who is heading Department of Economics at this point of time, and he has also one special course, Energy Economics. So, Department of Economics, earlier we were neighbors, but now they have separate building. Dr. Azeem Sahab, when we will have the pleasure of receiving you here in Faculty of Social Sciences, you will see that how, in a very holistic way, we practice our discipline with all the methodologies that we have at our disposal at this point of time. I also take this opportunity not only thank but shower blessings which our elder brother, patron Professor Pandey always does. Let me take this also opportunity to thank each and every participant because Dr. Azeem Sahab, you must be knowing today we are celebrating 105th birth anniversary of a very, very noble son of contemporary India, Deen Dayal Upadhyay. And in our building, right from very morning, our Honorable Dynamic Dean, the other dignitaries like Professor M.K. Singh, who is a doctor, but he is Dean Students of Welfare. So we were there. But Professor Rakesh Pandey sir makes it a point that he always shows us the way. No matter whatever function going on, our primary purpose is to enrich ourselves as far as production of knowledge, propagation of knowledge is concerned. So I take also this opportunity, two of the senior professors, they do listen to you, but they had other commitments because from Monday we are doing a special provisions for B.H.U admissions counseling, some leftover. So Professor Tazik Kalam, Professor Ranjana Sheel, the ex-head Professor Pratap was there, and they were just amazed at the level of discourses. This is Professor Pandey specializes not only in the heritage management. Earlier in his earlier, sir is basically a contemporary historian and modern economics. So I have only special words. But Professor Azeem Sahab, we will be grateful if you can extend your visit from Delhi to Varanasi in December. We will be, delighted. We will be delighted, and I will talk with my dynamic team if we can earmark some fund. I will talk about it because at this pandemic affected economy, a lot of non-academic things are being. But I will explore the possibility. And my again word of high sincere thanks to you. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, sir, very much. And I again thank our Honorable Head of Department Economics, Professor B.V. Singh, who just gave very valuable thoughts, and Professor Mishra, our head, also very well presented the ideas and invited you to the university. And I'm happy. And now, in the end, I request my computer expert who has been helping us to organize the lecture, Alok, Mr. Alok, who is an engineer, and he's working here as an help to the heritage management. So I will request him in the end to express thanks for all the participants and you and the other dignitaries. Ashok, please.
Yes, thank you so much, sir, for giving us very valuable and extraordinary time from your side, and we are very fortunate to hear some great person like our economics head and our coordinator, Professor Rakesh Pandey sir, and our HOD, Department of History, and our faculty members, Dr. Sudapa Das Pan. And thanks all the audience who is attending all the entire session. And I must say in our heart that is very wonderful lectures from your side, sir. and we are very fortunate to hear you. And thanks for this lecture. And thanks to everyone. Thank you so much, sir. And we will connect in future. Maybe day after tomorrow, maybe uh, according to our Pandey sir. And thanks, many thanks to you. And thank you so much, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank everyone. And I should just announce, that although audience is very less, that you will be placing this on YouTube, so that those who could not join, or those who anyhow could not join, or in the mid of the lecture who did not